Yosemite Sam had one of the first YouTube channels that I visited when I was being assessed with autism back in early 2021. And I had seen this video. It was brand new when I first watched it. And it is one of the reasons I started thinking maybe I should do a YouTube channel because I can help with this. It's a 2-hour live stream about autistic burnout. I'm not going to show you all 2 hours. And I have not watched it since that initial time almost a year ago, so it's going to be pretty fresh to me. It'll be a pretty spontaneous reaction, but it's also going to be heavily edited. I'm hoping to get it down to like 20 minutes from 2 hours. Fingers crossed. Okay, so we're starting, and Sam is talking about a quote that she put from Lao Tzu.
"The flame that burns twice as bright burns half as long," and I thought that was particularly relevant tonight. I was actually planning to have like candles and stuff behind me as a sort of visual metaphor for burnout, but then I thought that maybe that's overkill, and like
It would have been kind of cool and very atmospheric, but like, yeah, okay. The flame that burns twice as hot burns half as long, and I think that is an appropriate quote. Is it actually Lao Tzu? I didn't look it up, but I like it, and I like also that she's starting from a philosophical standpoint that of differentiating the experience of autism from the experience of being neurotypical. Autism, I think, is a pretty intense life experience. I've had several therapists tell me that I have stronger, more intense, and a wider range of emotions than a lot of their other clients. They kind of attribute it to my musicianship and my artistry that opened me to this thing. But I actually think that this thing, all the feelings, the intensity, and the wide emotional range, actually drew me to music. So I do think that part of that is coming from the differences in my brain that make me not neurotypical. The other thing I really like is that as this live stream started, in the chat, she mentions, a person who is the reason she's not burned out right now. And somebody in the text chat asks, why is a person the reason you're not burned out? And Sam says, "Oh, that's my assistant." And I was like, we don't have to do any more. Like, we have answered the question. What? How do you cure and prevent burnout? You get help. Like, okay, we're done. But there's like another 2 hours of live stream, so other cool stuff comes up, and let's go look at that.
as you can imagine, it's a very big deal for us, and the problem is it's pretty much unheard of outside of these comforting online circles. And even autistic people don't know that much about it. So there is very little research. There is barely any research done into autistic burnout specifically. There is very little written to help us guide us out of burnout, because everything that refers to burnout without specifically being autistic burnout is talking about a neurotypical version.
Except for a certain New York Times bestselling book called Burnout: The Secret to Unlocking the Stress Cycle, which is not specifically aimed at autistic people, but it was written by autistic people for themselves. So it just so happens that there's a lot of helpful overlap in that information, and very little of it does not apply to autistic people. Just Sam, this video came out after Burnout came out, and when she said that, I remember thinking, autistic people need to know that the book applies to them and it can be helpful. And like a lot of the things that she talks about in this video, I was like, oh my God, I can help her with this. And so hence my channel is here. But yes, there is very little research or resources directly written to or for or about an autistic audience, which is why I'm here.
When we're thinking about burnout and strategies for that, it's not as simple as just take some time off work and rest. And that's kind of why I ended up with so many pages of notes. Mandy Lord says, I find it much more difficult to recover from burnout as a mother. And I think that is very true. I keep on vaguely hinting at motherhood. I promise I'll get to it. But motherhood is nonstop. And so the thing about, motherhood or parenthood is that you can never catch up to yourself. Kind of like you can never get that break, because
Um, I say all the time that burnout is caused by unceasing demands and unmeetable goals, and that's what parenthood is by definition. That's just the nature of parenthood. And there is some solid research about parental burnout and in general caregiver burnout that is very well researched. As far as I know, there's nothing about autistic people in caring roles, but the solutions for autistic people experiencing parental burnout versus neurotypical people experiencing parental burnout and autistic people experiencing autistic burnout, I think among those things, you're going to find the solution for what can help you. Those resources do exist. You might have to dig a little deeper than a neurotypical person, but as I've said before, the solutions for autistic people tend to be, you know, do more work for less result, and this is another case of that.
Masking or camouflaging is extremely energy intensive. And I think the energy required to do it is part of the reason why it can be a contributing factor to burnout, because it just
Yes.
takes so much out of us,
Yes,
you know.
exactly.
Overstimulation or unsuitable sensory environments. And this would be like in a workplace, school, or home setting. And I would say like bullying, but maybe even low level bullying. So, like, unsatisfactory social relationships, being around people you don't like, even. And obviously, all of these things kind of like, it's not one thing, but they all add up. And especially if you don't know you're autistic, they can build up over a lifetime. And that's where it ends up in the situation where you've been masking. You might be very successful actually at your life, and you've been masking and nobody would even suspect you're autistic, but you have been autistic all this time. And then you hit, I don't know, 40, 50, 60, and you burn out. And I think it's those situations where you end up in a very prolonged state of autistic burnout.
Yes. What is called in the research is low level chronic stress. How they experiment on it that we talk about in the book is kind of rat research, where they put the rats in uncomfortable situations. They tilt their cages, or they spray water on their bedding so that it's damp, and it's nothing life threatening. It's just like a little uncomfortable, and everything's a little bit harder for those rats than it is for the other rats in the lab, who are just, they have nice level cages, they have nice dry bedding, and just life is a little easier for those rats. And for those of us who have more of those chronic low level stressors, yes, it adds up. That's exactly right. The nature of autistic chronic low level stressors is unique, but I don't think that dynamic is unique to autism. The dynamic of not fitting with the larger culture is common to literally everyone at some level to some degree. What she's talking about as the dynamic is completely accurate, completely true. Chronic low-level stressors do lead to burnout because it's unceasing demands and unmeetable goals. It's just that the demands she's talking about are relatively low stakes. We do suffer, and that suffering is real. The struggle literally is real. And the same dynamic is at play for much higher stakes, for people whose differences are more drastic, that can't be hidden, for example. So yeah, she nailed the dynamic. I just wanted to put it in context.
It's any point in life where the ongoing environment is chronically hostile to the autistic person. And so for me, how I understand it, or how I would like to explain it, and please don't think that I am like the ultimate authority on this. As I
I'm not an ultimate authority, but I'm pretty good authority.
said, there isn't that much research, and it's obviously going to be different for different people. So I'm
Yes,
drawing on the research
100%.
that I have done and my own experiences, talking to other people's experiences. But the way I see it is that autistic burnout is the result of things that are specifically stressful to autistic people that
Yes.
present as chronic stress to the
Yes.
body, mind, or chronic emotional stress, often combined with things that might also be
All stress is emotional stress because stress is by definition an emotion.
considered stressful to non-autistic people.
And burnout.
So things that
Burnout's primary characteristic, especially in women, is emotional exhaustion. So you get stuck in one kind of feeling and you never get to like move out of that feeling. That's when you get burned out. So yeah, emotional burnout is I mean, that's the only kind of burnout there is.
You know, what do regular people find stressful? Changing jobs, losing your jobs,
Right.
divorce, moving house,
Yes.
um,
Parenthood.
you
Sam,
know,
parenthood.
breakups, having a child, like all of
Yeah, yeah,
these
yeah, yeah.
things
Good.
are stressful events. And I can't remember what it's called, but you can search. There is a kind of ranking of the most stressful
Yes.
life events. So you can have a
You
look
just
and, you know, if you
listed a
tick,
bunch of
if
them.
you
Yeah,
score
good.
over a certain amount in the last year, it's like, yes, you're very stressed. You know, everyday life comes with stress.
Yes.
But the thing that makes the autistic burnout more difficult to get out of is that the stress not be recognized, or the cause of the stress might not be recognized by the people around them.
The cause of the stress. Oh, the cause of the stress, as in autism specifically, is the cause of the stress. But I don't think that's the reason that autistic burnout is more difficult to get out of. Because lots and lots and lots of women and people of color and trans folks and people who don't speak English as a first language in the United States, people who are non-Christian in the United States, all face that. I booped my microphone. All face that friction between who they are and who the world holds up as an ideal and the most acceptable kind of person. And that stress is not widely recognized. It's literally denied by a lot of people. By the Uber culture says, you know, well, all lives matter and sexism doesn't exist anymore. And we don't, it's really the post racist world. Like, that's like not just a lack of awareness or recognition, but outright denial that that exists. People aren't generally denying that autism exists, although you may have family members who are like, you can't be autistic. No, no, no. I mean, those people are huge assholes. So please consider taking action, separating yourself from those people in your life. But the lack of recognition that you are autistic only makes recovering from burnout more difficult because the strategies that autistic people need to use is slightly different from what works for neurotypical people. If you don't know that you're autistic and you are deeply in burnout and it's burnout caused by your autistic traits, you don't need to know that you're autistic in order to recover from burnout, using the same strategies that a neurotypical person might learn about.
So, for example, overstimulation, chronic overstimulation. You know, I know someone who has moved house and lives in an apartment building where, you know, the noise, it's not necessarily loud in terms of decibels, but it's kind of irritating noise. And this kind of like constant agitating noise. A neurotypical person might say, well, what's the big deal? You know, just ignore it kind of thing. But an autistic person obviously can't. And
fair enough. Yeah, that might be a difference in the kinds of things that cause us stress that wouldn't be recognized as a thing that causes stress. But I'd call a thing like that a microaggression. And lots of people on other intersections of oppression would also experience similar kinds of denials of things that matter. Um, so again, I think that that particular example of, you know, sensory overstimulation is a specific thing to autism, but as a thing that exists as a structure in the structure of the system that causes burnout, it is not unique among all the ways that burnout is caused. Every kind of folks who are any kind of non-conforming to this arbitrarily socially constructed ideal experience microaggressions like that, denial of the things that cause them stress because they seem to be no big deal to the other people around them. It's on parallel with every other kind of difference from the Uber culture.
and that has really severe repercussions for their life. And so
Yeah.
that's kind of the difference. And I hope that I'm explaining this right.
You're doing better than I am, Sam.
Send
So
me, but also this feeling of constantly being on edge. Um, and along with anxiety, irritability, and being on edge, of course, comes sleep problems. And once you have sleep problems, that exacerbates the whole thing, doesn't it?
yes, once you have sleep problems, that exacerbates the whole thing.
Because once you're not sleeping, you're not resting, and especially if you're sleeping but you're not sleeping well, and that's not really something that you can control, is the quality of your sleep.
Okay, I lied that she said that there's something you can't control is the quality of your sleep. That is factually incorrect. Sorry, Sam. I'm so appreciative that you're doing this work, but the idea that you can't control the quality of your sleep is wrong. I am here to give you hope and say you can improve the quality of your sleep through specific actions that you take. And there's a chapter about it in our book. The whole book, Matt Walker's Why We Sleep, has concrete, specific solutions in it. You can talk to a sleep therapist. They're people whose job it is to help you improve the quality of your sleep. And yes, it works for autistic people. It is harder for autistic people, and you get not as impactful results as quickly. It's more work for less results for autistic people, but we absolutely can take actions to improve the quality of our sleep. Oh, Sam, I hope that you have been getting better quality sleep and that you have discovered all the ways that you can get better quality sleep by taking certain specific actions. You can. I'm sorry about being like, oh, you're wrong about this, but like the good news is you're wrong about this.
So all of these things, it can be very hard to differentiate from depression.
Yeah, there's a lot of videos about like, is it autism or is it depression? And Emily and I even made a Feminist Survival Project podcast episode about the difference between burnout and depression. I have had burnout and depression, and they are nothing alike. If you're thinking like, oh God, this might be depression, get assessed for depression. It could save your life. Talk to a therapist. Take medication if everyone decides that's the appropriate step for you. All you need to know about is it depression or is it burnout is if you think you're depressed, see a professional right away and get assessed for depression.
Obviously, a good professional will be able to help with this. Somebody who obviously knows about autistic burnout, because if they don't know what autistic burnout is, they're not going to know whether you're depressed.
They will know. They will know if you're depressed. They're really good at assessing depression.
Or whether you're burnt out. And I think you need to know before you start medicating potentially, because, if you're not depressed, then, what is the purpose of taking the medication? Well, I don't know. Let's not talk about medication.
They're not going to medicate you unless you really need it. Like, they don't hand out medication like candy. I know this because when I was suicidally depressed, I had a hard time getting fucking medication. I could have died. I could have died if I hadn't gotten meds, and it was really hard to get meds. So like getting medicated for depression is not just like you go into the psychiatrist's office. First of all, you have to find a psychiatrist who like they're not going to accidentally give you antidepressants if all you are is burnt out and you're not depressed. Like, please do not worry about that. If you're depressed, they will help you. They will know it. They will recognize it. It's not depression, and you don't need medication. There's so little risk of you getting antidepressant medication if you don't really need it, from my experience.
Medication right now. But the difference between regular burnout and I'll call it neurotypical depression, the depression as described in psychological literature, is that...
Okay, I'm just gonna like skip the rest of this because like she's talking about a thing that she doesn't really know about, which is fine. She did research and she looked up differences. But what I'm here to tell you from a position of expertise, both in my own experience of depression and in researching all kinds of experiences with burnout, is that if you're not sure if you have burnout or depression, see a professional. They can recognize depression like that. It'll be very easy for them to be like, oh, this is depression. They're not going to confuse burnout for depression. They are different, and a professional will recognize it. And if you don't have depression, they're not going to just like put you on meds for no reason. I'm gonna react to the rest of this video in a separate thing, because I gotta be done now, or the rest of this will just be like brain fog me staring blankly. So this has been the first part of my reaction. I will be back probably next week with the second half of my reaction to Yosemite Sam's 2-hour live stream about autistic burnout. And until then, remember that the cure for burnout is not self-care. You're not on your own in this. You don't have to do it by yourself. You deserve help. You deserve support, and you deserve resources. The cure for burnout is all of us caring for each other.